The Kigali Code, how a genocide survivor nation hacked the future and nobody noticed. Imagine you wake up tomorrow and your iPhone won't connect to the internet. Your Uber app is frozen. Your company's cloud storage, completely inaccessible. It's not a cyber attack. It's not a solar flare. It's because a country the size of Maryland that most Americans couldn't find on a map just flipped the switch on the infrastructure that runs half the internet in Africa. We're not talking about South Africa. We're not talking about Egypt or Nigeria. We're talking about a landlocked country that 30 years ago was literally covered in bodies. A country where nearly 1 million people were murdered in 100 days. A country that the world wrote off as a permanent humanitarian crisis. Here's what nobody tells you. Rwanda didn't just recover. They didn't just rebuild. They executed the most audacious national transformation in modern history. And while the West was busy debating diversity statements and quarterly earnings, Rwanda was quietly becoming the Singapore of Africa. Except deadlier, except smarter, except they're playing a game that makes Singapore look like amateur hour. This is the story of how a nation soaked in blood became the most business-friendly, digitally advanced, corruption-free country on the continent. How they're building the physical backbone of Africa's internet. How they've turned authoritarian efficiency into an export product. And how they might be pioneering a model of development that terrifies Western democracies because it actually works. Welcome to the Kigali Code. One, the 100 days that should have ended everything. The year is 1994. Between April and July, roughly 800,000 to 1 million Rwandans are murdered. Neighbors kill neighbors with machetes. Bodies clog the rivers. The international community watches on CNN and does nothing. When it's over, the country is gone. Not metaphorically, actually gone. 70% of the population is dead, displaced, or in exile. The entire professional class, doctors, lawyers, engineers, has been exterminated or fled. The infrastructure is destroyed, the economy is non-existent. Children are raising children. There's no electricity grid, no phone system, no banking sector. The UN sends in peacekeepers to manage the corpses. Aid organizations set up refugee camps. The international narrative writes itself. Rwanda is a permanent ward of the global community, a charity case, a place where well-meaning Westerners will go to build schools and feel good about themselves for the next 50 years. Fast forward to 2024. Rwanda's GDP per capita has grown 800% since 1994. Kigali, the capital, is cleaner than most European cities. The country ranks 38th globally in ease of doing business, higher than Italy, higher than India, higher than South Africa. Rwanda has universal health insurance. Maternal mortality has dropped 77%. Literacy has gone from 58% to 75%. And here's the kicker. They did it in one generation, under one leader. Paul Kagame, the rebel commander who stopped the genocide, has been effectively running Rwanda since 1994. He's been president since 2000. In the West, we're taught that's called a dictatorship. In Rwanda, they call it the only reason we're not still picking up body parts. But here's what makes this story more complex than dictator modernizes country. Kagame didn't just rebuild Rwanda, he reverse-engineered the development playbook and added cheat codes nobody else is willing to use. 2. The philosophy of Agaciro and why Western development models failed. There's a Kinyarwanda word you need to understand, Agaciro. It translates roughly as dignity or self-worth, but that's like saying Mount Kilimanjaro is a hill. It completely misses the weight. Agaciro is the national philosophy that says, we will never be dependent again. We will never beg again. We will never let foreigners tell us how to run our country again. After the genocide, the aid industry descended on Rwanda like locusts. NGOs, UN agencies, consultants with master's degrees in post-conflict development who'd never run so much as a lemonade stand. They brought their templates, their workshops, their capacity-building seminars. Kagame looked at them and said, "Get out." Not literally, he took their money, but he refused to let them run anything. He told the World Bank, "We'll take your loans, but we're hiring our own contractors." He told USAID, "We'll accept your grants, but our ministers set the priorities, not your program officers." This was heresy in the development world. The entire aid industry is built on the assumption that poor countries are poor because they're incompetent, that they need white people with clipboards to teach them how to govern. Rwanda flipped the script. They said, "We're not incompetent. We were sabotaged. Now we're going to move faster than you can write your quarterly reports." Let me give you a concrete example. In most African countries, if you want to start a business, you navigate a Kafkaesque nightmare. Weeks of paperwork, bribes to officials, unclear regulations, no enforcement. In Rwanda, you can register a company in 6 hours, online. The entire process is digital. No bribes, no facilitation fees, no mysterious delays. How? Because Kagame told the bureaucracy, "Simplify it or you're fired." And he meant it. This is the Agaciro model, national pride through brutal efficiency. Rwanda doesn't have natural resources, no oil, no diamonds, no copper. What they have is discipline, and they've turned discipline into a competitive advantage. Every last Saturday of the month is Umuganda, mandatory community service. The president shows up, ministers show up, everyone cleans the streets, repairs infrastructure, plants trees. It's not a photo op, it's a cultural operating system. Western journalists visit and call it authoritarian. Rwandans call it the reason our streets aren't covered in trash like Nairobi. The West looks at this and sees a lack of freedom. Rwanda looks at the West and sees chaos masquerading as democracy. 3. The data center gambit that nobody saw coming. Let's talk about the thing that's actually changing the game. The thing that could make Rwanda the most strategically important country in Africa. Data centers. I know, not sexy, not exciting, but hear me out. In 2018, Rwanda announced it was building East Africa's largest data center in Kigali. Western tech analysts barely noticed. Another ambitious African project that would probably get abandoned halfway through, right? Wrong. The Kigali Data Center Park is operational. It's Tier 3 certified, 99.98% uptime. It's powered by renewable energy. Rwanda gets 60% of its electricity from hydro, and it's strategically positioned in the geographic center of Africa, with fiber optic cables connecting to undersea cables on both coasts. Here's why this matters. Right now, if a company in Kenya wants to store data, where does it go? Europe or South Africa. That means African data is being routed through cables that run under the ocean to London or Amsterdam, then back. The latency is terrible, the costs are high, and European data protection laws mean African governments have limited sovereignty over their own citizens' information. Rwanda looked at this and saw an opportunity. They said, what if we become the Switzerland of African data? Neutral, stable, secure, business-friendly, lower latency than routing to Europe, cheaper than South Africa, and politically reliable. Kagame runs such a tight ship that the risk of civil unrest or government collapse is essentially zero. Google, Microsoft, and Amazon Web Services are all now exploring partnerships with Rwanda for regional data infrastructure. African banks are moving servers to Kigali. Fintech companies are setting up there. But here's where it gets really interesting. Rwanda isn't just hosting data. They're building digital public infrastructure that they're exporting to other African countries. Rwanda's Irembo platform, a one-stop government services portal where you can renew your driver's license, register a business, apply for permits, all online, is now being licensed to other African nations. Kenya is using it. Zambia is using it. Ethiopia is exploring it. Rwanda is doing what China did with physical infrastructure, ports, railways, but for digital infrastructure. And just like China's Belt and Road, there's a strategic lock-in. Once your country's digital services run on Rwandan-designed systems, you're in their ecosystem. You're buying their updates. You're training your people on their platforms. This is invisible empire building. 4. The medical drone network that delivered the future. Let me tell you about the moment I realized Rwanda was playing a different game than anyone else. 2016, a company called Zipline approaches the Rwandan government with a crazy idea. What if we used drones to deliver blood and medical supplies to remote hospitals? In most countries, this proposal would trigger a 5-year feasibility study, an environmental impact assessment, a regulatory review, then probably get killed by special interests. In Rwanda, Kagami's response was, "How fast can you start?" Within 1 year, Zipline had built the world's first national drone delivery network. Here's how it works. A rural clinic needs blood for a mother hemorrhaging during childbirth. They text the central distribution center. A drone is loaded and launched within minutes. It flies up to 80 kilometers, drops the blood via parachute to the clinic's landing zone. Round trip, 30 to 45 minutes. Before drones, that same delivery by road could take 4+ hours. In emergency medicine, that's the difference between life and death. Today, Rwanda has 4 drone ports covering the entire country. They've completed over 600,000 deliveries. Maternal mortality has plummeted in rural areas. But here's what makes this a geopolitical power move. Rwanda didn't just solve their own problem. They created a proof of concept that the entire world is now copying. Zipline has expanded to Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and now the United States, delivering COVID vaccines in North Carolina and Arkansas. When American hospitals adopted drone delivery, they were using a system that was pioneered and beta tested in Rwanda. Think about the symbolism. A country that was literally dismembered in 1994 is now exporting healthcare innovation to America. This is the pattern. Rwanda identifies a bottleneck, implements a radical solution faster than anyone else, then monetizes the expertise. 5. The African Singapore tax haven that's not quite what it seems. Here's where things get morally complicated. Rwanda has positioned itself as the business hub of East Africa. Low corruption, stable government, fast bureaucracy, tech-friendly regulations. International companies are flooding in. Volkswagen opened its first African assembly plant in Kigali. Maraphones built the first made-in-Africa smartphone factory in Rwanda. Andela, the tech talent company, has a major training hub there. On paper, this is the success story, the free market miracle. Rwanda did capitalism right. But let's complicate that. Rwanda's corporate tax rate is 30%, not particularly low. So why are companies coming? Because Rwanda offers something more valuable than low taxes: predictability. In Nigeria, you might pay less in official taxes, but you'll pay multiples more in bribes, security fees, and dealing with infrastructure failures. In Kenya, your shipping containers might sit in port for weeks due to administrative delays. In South Africa, load shedding, power cuts, can shut down your factory for 8 hours a day. In Rwanda, the lights stay on, the roads are maintained, the courts enforce contracts. Corruption is genuinely rare. Rwanda ranks 52nd globally on Transparency International, higher than Italy, higher than South Korea. So this isn't a tax haven, it's a stability arbitrage. But here's the darker edge. How does Rwanda maintain that stability? Strict media control, critical journalists have been imprisoned or disappeared, political opposition is effectively banned. Kagame wins elections with 98% of the vote. Surveillance is pervasive. The state monitors communications. Dissidents abroad have been assassinated. Rwandan intelligence has been linked to killings in South Africa and Belgium. So when Western investors praise Rwanda's business-friendly environment, what they're really praising is authoritarian efficiency. The unspoken deal: Kagame delivers growth, safety, and infrastructure. In exchange, you don't ask questions about what happens to opposition politicians. This is the Singapore model on steroids. Lee Kuan Yew built Singapore with similar methods: controlled press, restricted freedoms, but spectacular economic results. Rwanda is doing the same, except they're starting from a much lower base and moving faster. The question the West can't answer: is democracy a prerequisite for development, or is it a luxury you can afford after development? Rwanda is betting on the latter. And the uncomfortable truth is, it's working. 6. The African Union power play. Let's talk about the move that reveals the master plan. In 2018, the African Continental Free Trade Area, or AFCA-CFTA, agreement was signed, creating one of the largest free trade zones since the WTO. 54 African countries, 1.3 billion people, $3.4 trillion combined GDP. Guess where the AFCA-CFTA Secretariat, the headquarters that will administer the entire Continental Free Trade Zone, is located? Accra, Ghana. Wait, what? Not Kigali, not Lagos, not Johannesburg. Accra, Ghana won the bid to host the AFCA-CFTA Secretariat in 2019. So does this destroy the Rwanda narrative? Actually, no. It makes it more interesting. Rwanda didn't get the main headquarters, but here's what they did get. Rwanda successfully lobbied to host several AFCA-CFTA institutions and specialized agencies. The Pan-African Payment and Settlement System's headquarters. This is huge. The continental payment infrastructure, key continental trade facilitation programs, major regional coordination offices. Here's the genius move. While Ghana got the ceremonial headquarters, speeches, ribbon cuttings, diplomatic photo ops, Rwanda positioned itself to control the actual infrastructure that makes continental trade work: the payment systems, the digital rails, the technical backend. It's like losing the bid to host the UN building, but winning the contract to run the UN's IT systems and financial infrastructure. Ghana gets the presidents showing up for summits. Rwanda gets every transaction flowing through their payment systems. This is even more Kagame than winning the headquarters would have been. He didn't fight for the symbolic prize, he went for the infrastructural choke point. While other countries competed for prestige, Rwanda built the pipes. And now, Rwanda has positioned itself not as the geographic center, but as the operational center of African digital trade. Every cross-border payment will flow through systems Rwanda helped build. Every fintech company needs to integrate with Rwanda's platforms. This is the ultimate inside position. Invisible, but indispensable. The geopolitics remain the same. Rwanda is simultaneously playing all sides. They accept Chinese investment, infrastructure, tech. They host UK asylum seekers, a controversial deal to process British refugees. They receive US military training, counter-terrorism partnerships. They deploy peacekeepers for the UN. Rwanda has troops in CAR, South Sudan, Mozambique, not Haiti currently. Rwanda has become indispensable to everyone. China needs a stable partner in East Africa. The UK needs someone to take the migrants they don't want. The US needs a reliable military ally. The UN needs competent peacekeepers. Kagame isn't choosing sides. He's charging rent to all sides. This is what small states with strategic importance can do when they're ruthlessly pragmatic. And it's even smarter to control the infrastructure while letting others have the ceremonial headquarters. 7. The Umunyarwanda Identity Forge. Let's talk about something that seems completely unrelated, but isn't: national identity. After the genocide, Rwanda had a problem. The entire country was divided into ethnic categories: Hutu, Tutsi, Twa, and those categories had been weaponized into machinery of death. So Kagame did something radical. He banned ethnicity. Not the concept, you can't ban how people see themselves, but legally, officially, publicly, there are no ethnic categories in Rwanda. You cannot identify as Hutu or Tutsi on any government document. You cannot form political parties based on ethnicity. You cannot teach ethnic history in schools the way it was taught before. There is only one legal identity: Rwandan. The program is called Ndi Umunyarwanda. I am Rwandan. It's a nationwide education and reconciliation initiative where genocide perpetrators and survivors live in the same villages, attend the same community courts called Gachaka, and are forced to rebuild together. Western human rights organizations look at this and scream, "You're erasing identity, you're suppressing free expression." Rwandans look back and say, "Free expression of ethnic hatred is what got us 1 million dead bodies." This is the ultimate tension. The West values individual rights above all. Rwanda values collective survival above all. And here's the uncomfortable part: it's working. Rwanda has had 0 ethnic violence since 1994. Intermarriage rates are rising. Surveys show young Rwandans genuinely identify as Rwandan first. Kagame's approval ratings are legitimately high, yes, even accounting for coercion. The economic results matter. But this comes at a cost. You cannot publicly criticize the government's narrative of the genocide. You cannot question the official history. You cannot form opposition movements that the government deems divisionist. Rwanda has created a forced national identity through a combination of genuine reconciliation and authoritarian control. This terrifies the West because it suggests that maybe, just maybe, liberal democracy isn't the only path to peace. That maybe, sometimes, a strong hand is necessary to prevent humans from slaughtering each other. This is the ideological export that no one wants to talk about: authoritarian nation building as a legitimate development model. And across Africa, leaders are watching Rwanda and thinking, maybe Kagame is right. 8. The dark side. The blood price of efficiency. Okay, time for brutal honesty. Everything I've described so far has a body count attached to it. Let's talk about what Rwanda doesn't want you to Google. The Congo problem. Since 1996, Rwanda has been deeply involved in the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, its massive neighbor to the west. Officially, they're fighting Hutu extremists who fled after the genocide. Unofficially, Rwanda has been accused of backing rebel groups that destabilize eastern DRC, looting minerals, coltan, tin, gold, worth billions, and fueling a conflict that has killed an estimated 6 million people since 1996. UN reports have documented Rwandan military operations inside Congo. International investigators have traced conflict minerals from Congolese mines to Rwandan export companies to your smartphone supply chain. So, when you marvel at Rwanda's economic growth, ask yourself, how much of that is funded by blood minerals from next door? The assassination program. Rwandan dissidents living in exile have a disturbing habit of ending up dead. Patrick Karegeya, former intelligence chief, strangled in South Africa, 2014. Juvenal Uwilingiamana, journalist, found dead in Mozambique, 2023. Multiple attempts on Kayumba Nyamasa, former general, in South Africa. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have documented credible evidence of a transnational assassination program targeting regime critics. The political prisoners. Paul Rusesabagina, the Hotel Rwanda hero, was kidnapped from Dubai in 2020, rendered to Kigali, convicted in a trial widely condemned as a sham, and sentenced to 25 years. He was eventually released after international pressure, but only after serving 3 years. Victoire Ingabire, an opposition leader, was imprisoned for 8 years on terrorism charges that human rights groups say were fabricated. These aren't accidents. These aren't unfortunate excesses. This is systematic repression. So here's the question nobody wants to answer. Can you have Rwanda's economic miracle without Rwanda's authoritarianism? Maybe the efficiency, the lack of corruption, the rapid decision-making, maybe all of that requires a government willing to disappear its critics? Maybe that's just the excuse authoritarians use to justify murder. I don't have the answer, but I know that when Western investors fly into Kigali, tour the clean streets, meet with friendly officials, and sign deals, they're choosing to not ask where the bodies are buried. 9. The UK asylum deal that broke the internet. In April 2022, the UK and Rwanda signed one of the most controversial agreements in modern migration policy. The deal? The UK would send asylum seekers who arrive illegally in Britain to Rwanda for processing, not temporarily, permanently. If your asylum claim is approved, you get to stay in Rwanda, not return to the UK. Britain would pay Rwanda $120 million up front, plus hundreds of millions more for each person transferred. The reaction was nuclear. Human rights groups called it cruel and inhumane. The UN Refugee Agency condemned it. British courts initially blocked it. The European Court of Human Rights intervened. But here's what nobody talks about. Rwanda said yes. Think about the geopolitical judo move here. The UK, a former colonial power, is essentially paying an African country to take the migrants it doesn't want. And Rwanda is saying, sure, we'll take your money and your people. We'll process them better than you ever could, and we'll make you look incompetent in the process. This is the ultimate post-colonial reversal. Britain used to rule a quarter of the globe. Now they're paying a country the size of Wales to handle a problem they can't solve domestically. And Rwanda? They're getting hundreds of millions in cash, international legitimacy, the UK is validating Rwanda as safe, leverage over Britain, you need us more than we need you, and a model they can sell to other European countries drowning in migration politics. Whether the policy actually happens is almost beside the point. The fact that the deal exists at all shows how much power dynamics have shifted. Rwanda isn't a charity case anymore. They're selling solutions to the West's problems. 10. The Kigali Code, control through competence. So we've arrived at the paradox. Rwanda became powerful by being so competent that ideology becomes irrelevant. Western democracies want to condemn Kagame's authoritarianism, but they can't ignore his results. African countries want to criticize Rwanda's involvement in Congo, but they can't match Rwanda's institutional capacity. This is the Kigali Code. If you deliver growth, stability, and services, you can get away with almost anything. China figured this out decades ago. Singapore figured it out in the 1960s. Rwanda is the latest iteration, but with an African twist. They're using colonial guilt and development metrics as a shield. When human rights groups criticize Rwanda, Kagame's response is, "Where were you in 1994?" It's rhetorical checkmate. The West watched a genocide happen and did nothing. They have no moral authority left. When the UN questions Rwanda's Congo policy, Kagame says, "We're preventing another genocide. We're protecting our borders. If you want to stop us, deploy your own troops." Nobody does. When journalists investigate, they're denied visas or expelled. When opposition forms, it's crushed. When dissidents flee, they're hunted. But the economy grows. The roads get paved, the hospitals function, and in a continent where most governments can't deliver basic services, that competence becomes its own form of legitimacy. This is authoritarian development as a competitive advantage. And the terrifying part? Other African leaders are taking notes. 11. The 2030 scenario. Let me paint you a picture of 2030. Your company is expanding into East Africa. You need to set up a regional headquarters. Your consultants give you 3 options: Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, or Kigali. Nairobi has the biggest market, but chronic instability and corruption. Dar es Salaam is cheap, but infrastructure is a mess. Kigali has the best internet in the region, the fastest business registration, the most reliable power, and a government that actually responds to emails. You choose Kigali. Everyone chooses Kigali. Your data is stored in Kigali's data centers. Your fintech app runs on Rwanda's payment rails. Your logistics network uses Kigali as a hub because it's the only East African airport where customs actually works. Meanwhile, the AfCFTA is operational. Tariffs across Africa are falling, trade is booming, and every major trade negotiation, every continental policy meeting happens in Kigali. Rwanda's GDP per capita has hit $3,000, up from $200 in 1994. They've become the Israel of Africa. Small, surrounded by larger, unstable neighbors, but so technologically advanced and strategically important that they're untouchable. The Congo War is still simmering. Dissidents are still disappearing. The press is still controlled. But nobody writes, Rwanda's authoritarian model is funding regional instability. They write, Rwanda, Africa's biggest success story. Because that's what the investment reports say. That's what the World Bank says. That's what your company's risk assessment says. The headlines that year read, Nigeria leads Africa in population, and South Africa struggles with energy crisis. Nobody writes, Rwanda controls the digital infrastructure that makes African trade possible. Because that's not a headline. That's just reality. Final thoughts. The next time you read about African development, take a second to ask yourself whose version of development you're actually talking about. The Western model says democracy first, development later. Free press, free elections, human rights, then maybe economic growth. The Rwanda model says survival first, stability second, development third, and if democracy happens, it happens on our terms, not yours. For 30 years after the genocide, the world expected Rwanda to stay broken, to stay dependent, to stay grateful for aid. Instead, they built a machine so efficient, so ruthless, and so effective that the rest of Africa is now copying it. Rwanda didn't ask permission. They didn't wait for validation. They just built faster than anyone could write a critique. And now they're the ones holding the infrastructure that makes the future possible. Maybe they're a beacon of African Renaissance. Maybe they're a warning about the price of efficiency. Maybe they're both. But one thing is certain, you can't ignore them anymore. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe if you want more stories about the countries reshaping the world while everyone's looking the other way. And maybe start paying attention to what's happening in Kigali, because whether you like it or not, that's where decisions about Africa's future are being made.